Good afternoon. I'm Richard Painter. I am announcing today that I am forming an exploratory committee to look into the possibility of running for the seat that was recently vacated by Senator Franken and is now held by Senator Tina Smith pursuant to her appointment by the governor. I just want to talk to you briefly today about the issues that concern me the most and then take a few questions. I have for years worked on issues concerning ethics in corporations, in the legal profession, and in government. And I was the chief ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush in the White House from 2005 to 2007. I have seen firsthand at the state level when I lived in Illinois before I moved to Washington, and in New York where I practiced law at the same time that Donald Trump was putting together real estate deals. I have seen corruption firsthand. I have seen corruption in Washington, D.C. And I will emphasize that the corruption we see today is not to be blamed principally on President Donald Trump, even though I've criticized him. It is to be blamed on the role of money in politics. Our system of representative democracy has been corrupted by PACs, super PACs, and dark money organizations. These are organizations that corrupted our political system before the Citizens United case and have continued to corrupt our political system much more so after the Supreme Court in the Citizens United case gave these organizations the First Amendment right to use their money to bribe our politicians. And it's just flat out wrong. And if I do decide to pursue a race for this seat, I will make sure we do not have super PAC money, that we do not have dark money organizations supporting my campaign. I do not think the United States Senator from Minnesota or any other state should be beholden to special interests who fund the campaigns. I am sick and tired of candidates being chosen in the major political parties in the so-called green primary, as Professor Lawrence Lessig of Harvard University described it. The green primary where the money determines who wins the primary, and then the voters show up in November and are told what the two choices are. We've had enough of this. And if I choose to enter this race, it will be to fix the problem of corruption in our government at the federal level, where it is the worst, and reaching into the states where we have seen campaign finance corrupt state government across the country. And I believe that this state is entitled to be represented by two senators who are responsible only to the people of the state of Minnesota who elected them, not to special interests. And I would like to take some questions, and then I will, over the next couple of weeks, I will be exploring this possibility, thinking about the different options, and then decide whether to enter the race, either in the Republican primary. I've been in the Republican Party for 30 years. It's a very different party than when I first became a Republican back in the 1980s. Things have changed. And I want to explore whether there's a place for me there anymore. There's a Democratic Party. I haven't worked for Democratic candidates for decades. I voted for some because I haven't been presented with some very good alternatives. And then they're independent. There's the independent option. And I'm going to be considering all three as I put together this exploratory committee, and I'd like to take some questions, if you have any.
What will make your decision? Because for most candidates considering a run, it's access to adequate funds that's part of that calculation.
Well, there are all different ways to run a campaign. You don't necessarily need a lot of money to run a campaign. I'd like to have the support of individual donors. But I'm not interested in PACs and super PACs and dark money organizations. I don't think that's the way to win an election. And a lot of these TV ads the candidates run, all they do is attack the other candidate. They don't say anything good about the candidate who's they're trying to get elected. They might have a picture of the candidate with a lot of smiles and hanging around some school kids or something, but they don't really say anything. They just attack the other candidate. I don't want to run a campaign like that. So obviously I'm going to need some financial support to make this successful. But I don't want to be involved in a campaign that just depends on a large amounts of money to throw dirt around.
Why the indecision about which party you would even align with at this point, or which party's ballot line you would try to be on?
Well, I have to think about that. I've been in the Republican Party for a long time. I was active in the Republican Party in Central Illinois before I went into the White House. I grew up in Central Illinois. When I was there, if you were downstate, tended to be a Republican. Democrats were up in Chicago, and they sent all the money up to Chicago. So I was a Republican. I got involved in the Republican Party in Central Illinois, and then I went to work in the Bush White House as the ethics lawyer. That's not a particular political position. Ethics shouldn't be political. I think there are a lot of good things about the Republican Party, but we've had some serious problems over the years. The Republican Party in this state is no longer the Republican Party of Governor Aaron Carlson. The Republican Party is no longer the party of even Ronald Reagan, not to mention Nelson Rockefeller and the more liberal Republicans. And so I need to think about whether there's a place for me in the party that I'd worked with for so long. Independents have a lot to bring to the political discourse. And we need some independence in the United States Senate. The state of Maine has a very good independent senator. And we may very well want to pursue the independent route. So that's what we're going to do in the exploratory committee. We're going to be thinking about that.
You mentioned all three, though, right?
I have this is my relationship with the Democratic Party. I have supported their candidates when their candidates are better than the Republicans, in my view, because I don't think this is about partisan politics. It's about having the best person for the position. I have not worked with the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has an incumbent senator, Senator Smith, and she has been the lieutenant governor. I think she's a presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party, but I'm happy to explore all options. That's the whole point of an exploratory committee.
What does that say to voters about your convictions on issues that you would consider, these three parties with some pretty widely different priorities?
Well, I think you have two major parties with, of course, a range of different opinions in the two major parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And then you have independents. And independents in the state have often run with the Independence Party, but there are also independents who are independent of any party. So that's the space in between. So I'm going to be looking at any and all options.
Professor, you have become well known for your criticism of President Trump, and I'm surprised to hear you say that this is not about President Trump. Would you explain that a little bit?
Well, I think that if we blame the problem of corruption in our government just on President Trump, we don't know anything about recent political history in this country. It has gotten a lot worse under President Trump. I have been very critical of many of the conflicts of interest in this White House and his behavior, whether it's on Twitter or his personal behavior and his financial conflicts of interest. But we have had a serious problem with money and politics for several decades. A problem I pointed out isn't just attributable to the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United. We had it when I was in the Bush White House. And we need to clean up politics in this country. And it's about a lot more than Donald Trump. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of voters voted for Donald Trump because they were sick and tired of business as usual in Washington. And Donald Trump offered them an alternative. I don't think it turned out to be a very good alternative. It hasn't played out very well, in my opinion. But there's a reason that people supported Donald Trump. They're sick and tired of business as usual, sick and tired of candidates from both political parties who have the behind-the-scenes briefings at Goldman Sachs, get the campaign cash, and then come out and say they're going to represent the people. And that's a problem in both political parties.
Even so, before coming to this press conference, I tore myself away from cable television when they're discussing, here's the headline, White House briefing amid porn star chaos. Tell me a little bit about your reaction to that.
Well, I was just on MSNBC before I came over here. They asked me a few questions about the porn star chaos. And I think it's just one more example of the lack of ethics and integrity that we're seeing in Washington, and particularly from this administration. But we've been seeing a lot of this. We have politicians who are about as faithful to their country and to their oath that they take to uphold the Constitution as they are to their spouses. And I find that, quite frankly, disgusting. And then furthermore, what we had there was the concealment of $130,000 in payoff money. That needed to be reported, legally needed to be reported to the Office of Government Ethics on the Financial Disclosure Form. Where was it? So that's just one example of, things that just aren't right, that don't strike ordinary people as right. And why are these people representing us or purporting to represent us in Washington?
And if I could ask one more question then. If you're elected, do you think that President Trump should be impeached?
Well, he would be impeached by the House of Representatives, so I can punt on that question by going to the Senate, can't I? But I think the way this works is the House of Representatives is going to have to take a look at all the evidence of abuse of power. And in this administration, and I have said that there is more than enough evidence to proceed with a committee hearing of both the House and the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I'm old enough to remember what happened to Richard Nixon when I was 11, 12 years old. And the amount of evidence of obstruction of justice and abuse of power that confronted the House and Senate then was less than what we've got right now when they convened those hearings. So it is time to start hearings to look into whether there's been abuse of power, obstruction of justice, violations of the Constitution by this administration. That's the starting point, and I think we need to find out the facts. Well, impeachment, the next step is the committees of the House of Representatives would forward a recommendation to impeach or not to impeach.
You understand what I'm asking?
Exactly right.
Vote to convict him in an impeachment.
And I would want to see the evidence. To vote to convict, that's a trial in the Senate. And I'd have to hear the evidence. I don't think that you can be a judge in a case and say ahead of time how you would rule whether they're high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, I have said I think he needs to go. That I think he ought to resign. I mean, he doesn't want to do the job. He doesn't want to comply with the United States Constitution. He's made that very clear. But whether I would actually vote to convict in a trial, that's a trial that has to take place. Nobody who's going to be a judge in a trial should announce ahead of time whether they would vote to convict or acquit. And that's the way that is handled in the United States Senate.
Sir, you face a June 5th filing deadline. How soon will you make your decision?
I'm going to try as hard as I can to figure this out as quickly as I can, but I want to do the right thing. I don't want to just throw a monkey wrench in this and not be able to do anything constructive. So I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing.
What are your thoughts on Senator Housley and Senator Tina Smith right now?
I think they're going to be both very, very good candidates, and I have prodded them from time to time to talk about the issues. I'd like to see more talk about the issues, and I've got my favorite Minnesota sports teams too, and so forth. And sometimes I don't like the long lines at the DMV, but I think we've got a lot to talk about, and we ought to get serious and focus on the real issues. I don't want to have the negativity in political campaigns around the country is just way, way too much, and these personal attacks are just way too much. So I'd like to talk to them about issues, not about personal attacks. I don't want to get into that.
But is there something Professor Vader's got to pick up his kids? We got time for about 2 more. Is there something that would prompt you to think that they're not adequate, that you should run instead of them?
Well, we're going to see what they have to say about the issues.
In Minnesota, when we have three-way races, we often wind up electing someone with less than a 50% or a majority vote. Does that trouble you at all as you think about whether you'd run as an independent?
I'm going to consider everything. The candidates who tend to throw races tend to be in the far left or the far right. Obviously, you run a Green Party candidate, they're going to pull more from the Democrat than the Republican. My record, if you look at my positions on issues, I'm a centrist in many ways, right up the middle. And I think we need a lot more space in the middle here. I'm not talking about the two candidates that we just mentioned specifically, but the two political parties have been moving one to the left and one to the right, and they've been leaving a lot of space in the middle. And that's the space that I think is occupied by a lot of voters. A lot of voters want somebody who's going to focus on efficient government, getting corruption out of government, well-managed government, someone who doesn't obsess on social issues all the time, but focus on the economic issues, such as bringing jobs to the people here in the state of Minnesota.
So what is this exploration going to entail? Are you going to be traveling the state, or are you expecting people to come to you and say, please run? We've seen you on TV a lot, and we like what you have to say.
I'll be talking to some people around the state, traveling the state. I have people call me up. I'll see what comes out of it.
And when you say, one more thing, you're saying independence, you're saying CE or TS? I'm just trying to make sure I...
No, I think the key is independent candidates have a meaningful, role to play, particularly in this current political environment. We've seen the two political parties in some situations move to ideological extremes. Problem number one. Problem number two, the amount of money in politics and the influence of all these super PACs. You know, what we're going to see in this race is super PACs that are funded outside the state of Minnesota. They're coming into a Senate race. It's a Senate race we didn't need to have but for the Franken departure. And we're going to have a lot of money from out of state influencing this race. If we have just a Democrat and Republican in there, we're going to have to deal with that money. And that's an issue. That's why a lot of people would say we need an independent candidate. But before I decide whether to do that, I want to explore my options, particularly with the Republican Party that I've been with for 30 years. Because the Republican Party has a proud history in this state. But recently, some things have been going off the rails, and I've made that clear as well.
It doesn't exactly inspire confidence among Republicans that you're also considering a Democratic bid or an Independence Party bid, right?
Depends on what kind of Republicans. Republicans who want to put their party first, who just care about party and willing to vote for anybody for President of the United States or Senator as long as they have an R next to their name. Well, then I guess I got to go get the R next to my name. No, I don't want to play that game. We need to have the best senators representing this state, just like we need to have the best governor in the governor's mansion. We need to have the best president of the United States, and we're not getting that now. And we need people to focus on the candidate and the quality of the candidate and the candidate's ideas, not the political party.
And what kind of a Republican are you? Describe yourself. Who are you?
Well, I've been a Republican. I take positions on issues that probably a lot closer to where the Republican Party was 20, 30 years ago. And I've tweeted out on some of those. There's a lot out there. I don't want to get into all the issues, everything from guns to freedom of choice. And I've tweeted out a lot of those issues. It's all out there, and probably a lot more that I've said than either the other two candidates on a lot of these issues. So it's all there for you to see, and I'll elaborate on my positions on some of the issues. But I will say that if you look at my views on the issues, there was a lot of room for somebody like me in the Republican Party when I was in college, back in the 1980s.
Does that make you a regular Republican?
Well, I had some disagreements with President Reagan, and we can go back over there. But I'll tell you, President Reagan was a lot better manager than what we've seen with President Trump. And I don't want to get into a conversation. I worked for President George W. Bush. I was his chief ethics lawyer. I was not a political advisor. But I'm my own person. I'm going to give my ideas as to what I think we can do in 2018 for the state of Minnesota and for the United States. And some of those ideas may be similar to something Ronald Reagan said, or maybe something Teddy Roosevelt said, who, by the way, was the first Republican who said we need to get money out of politics. And by the way, Barry Goldwater said we do not need corporate donations in political campaigns. So in that sense, I'm a Goldwater Republican. There are other things I disagree with late Senator Goldwater on. So we can go through the issues one by one.
Last one. Anybody?
Thank you.
Right here?
You said you'd be using the exploratory committee to determine if you want to run within the next 2 weeks. So is 2 weeks the timeline you're looking at?
No, I'm gonna take the time I need to take to make sure I make the right decision. And so we'll figure it out as we go along. We're well aware of the filing deadlines, both for primaries and filing deadlines for getting petitions to run as an independent candidate. So those are the outside limits, but I'd like to be able to make some decisions sooner than that.
Are you going to remain at the U during this exploration period, or do you have to set that aside for the time being?
No, I can remain at the University of Minnesota. The state employees, as I understand it, in this state can run for political office. We do not, of course, use the university facilities or the university name to endorse any political candidates. So I'm not going to be doing that. But I will continue at the U. I've been at the U. I love the U. Go Gophers.
Okay, guys, that's it. Thanks for coming out. You can schedule an interview.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.
All right.